I'm so conservative.
Rationalize in my head. These are things I read.
And I'm going to talk about Willow Creek.
Okay.
Willow Creek, a few years back, had invited.
Remembered at the time when Will Rogers said, I don't belong to any organized religion. I'm a Baptist.
Yeah. I am so conservative. If you didn't jump to conclusions, you might not get any exercise. I am so conservative. Welcome to the Unknown Webcast. This is a safety warning for our new viewers. I have to point out that I really am so conservative, I can turn left even when I'm driving. It is especially true that I'm theologically conservative. I want to know and believe what is true, and I'm willing to challenge what I believe. So for those viewers who have a fear of hearing an idea which may lead to actually thinking or testing their beliefs, this is a trigger warning. This is not a safe space for those who may be easily offended by having their ideas challenged or maybe even by our satire. Today is September 22, 2020. That's a lot of twos in there, Ron.
222.
This is broadcast number 208. There's another one. Dr. Peter Jones is joining us today. He has written several books on America and its embracing of Gnosticism. Today we're looking at revisiting one of those books, Pagans in the Pews, on today's One Known Webcast. My name is Don Bino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher, co-host, and resident COVID-19 tracker is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie Baby.
Greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm trees came out, saw their shadows, and now we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsors for this week's webcast include World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time has gone. World's End Theology Outlet, and guaranteed the most comfortable Bible you'll ever own, My Bible. And if you really enjoy this webcast, or if it really annoys you and you want to inflict it on someone else, to ensure your continued access to this program, please go to midwestoutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube. Greetings, Peter Jones. No longer with the Monkees. Or no, it was Davy Jones. You probably never heard that before.
Not the Monkees, the Beatles.
The Beatles. Well, that was Peter Best, right? He was the original drummer for the Beatles.
True.
Do you play the drums?
No, I play bass.
Excellent.
Really?
So
okay.
And so they replaced you with Paul McCartney then.
Well, you know what, Ron? You're closer than you might realize. Peter, as he tells his story, it turns out that he and John Lennon were schoolmates. Had ate fish and chips on Penny Lane, and then went on to separate careers.
Obviously. So you're a Liverpudlian? Is this what you're telling us?
I am telling you.
We believe you. Where do you live in Liverpool now, or somewhere else?
No, I'm in California now.
This is quite a distance between those two. I bet you there's a lot about you that would be interesting to know. Do we have time for that, Don?
Well, we have time for whatever we want.
Yeah. Then we can just invite him back for the rest. So you had a musical career at one time?
Well, just as a kid, I went to Quarrybank High School, where John Lennon was also in the same year as I, and we sat together for many years at the same desk. So I knew John very closely, watched him drawing his crazy cartoons and poems and everything else. So I sort of was in that group and played music with him. They invited me to join the Quarrymen, which was
Yeah.
a musical group that went around playing in Liverpool. And my parents, who were very fundamentalistic, wouldn't let me join because I would have to go to dances, which was a no-no at that time.
I heard of the Quarrymen, and wouldn't they dress up in like black leather jackets and slick their hair back at that time? That was the 50s thing. Is that the way they did it?
Yeah, I guess it was. But I was supposed to play the bass in that group, and I couldn't do it. So I never did make it to the Quarrymen, and probably therefore never made it to the Beatles. But I came close.
What could have been? What could have been? Well,
I know I could have been assassinated as well.
Maybe.
That's true.
Well, we can only hope. Who knows?
Well,
as long as we're looking on the bright side.
John was referring to me eating fish and chips on Penny Lane. The story was that John and I decided to break the school rules. You weren't supposed to leave the school at lunchtime. We climbed over the wall, a tall wall, and walked for 20 minutes to Penny Lane and bought chips and ate them. And as we came back, we were reclimbing over the school wall, and the headmaster saw us and gave that onerous, beckonous call, and we went into his study, and he gave both of us 6 of the best on our backsides. So I probably am the only one that has that in common with John Lennon. A bruised backside.
Bruised backside. So did you see the video of Paul McCartney driving through the neighborhood with some well-known British comedian, I guess, who does a program like this? He went back to
I heard about it. I'm afraid I didn't get to see the full video. I would love to see that because it would mean a lot to me.
He goes to apparently he sang in a church choir was it with John, or was it just Paul McCartney? I don't know, but he pointed out a church where he sang in the choir.
John, he wasn't very religious at all. His family wasn't religious either.
I think Paul indicated he really wasn't either, but he liked to sing in the choir anyways.
Right.
So, wow, this is you're the closest. We didn't know that. I mean, if we were actually in the same room, then I can say I had 1 degree of separation from John Lennon. That's an amazing thing.
Well, but John Lennon has impacted your life and my life and the church's life in some
imagine
ways. Imagine. And Peter talks about his first visit to the U.S. and then his second visit to the U.S. and the cultural transformation that had occurred. And came out. He's written several books on sort of where things were going, where they came from, and where they are going.
You have a perspective on that, considering who you know.
I guess so.
Now you had mentioned that John Lennon really didn't have any. Did he go to college?
Oh no,
none of them did. I don't think.
Okay,
no.
So he didn't really have any college or big theological education, and yet he really has influenced theology outside and inside the church in some fairly substantial ways. How does that work?
That worked because they were very much into the culture in the was it the early 70s or late 60s?
60s,
probably middle 60s. I don't remember the date when the Beatles went east and studied with the Maharaji Mahesh Yogi, because they were fascinated by Hinduism. And
I think that was 66, I think.
Yeah, something like that. So they were part of the 60s Cultural Revolution, and they brought home the the love of Hinduism and sort of promoted it very subtly in their songs. And I think Imagine would be one of the songs that would be part of that. I need to plug in my computer. Hang on, guys.
Okay, that would be good. Yeah. The Beatles went to India. Yeah. Oh, you know what? I think I'm off. 1968. They traveled to northern India. I thought it was earlier than that because I thought they were already. I think they might have already been employing the Indian sitar in some of their music before '68. I think. It was in Sgt. Pepper, which came out in '67. You had the sitar music with Ravi Shankar. So they were influenced by. It looks like we lost him. They had the Indian music influenced by the Ravi Shankar and others earlier than their trip, but then they went, and the two that especially got into Hinduism, or actually it was. Transcendental meditation, wasn't it? It was the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Was that who they visited with?
Yeah.
Let me check.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, in any case, TM. They, I think he's back. He's coming back.
I'm back. I was plugging my computer in. It wasn't plugged in, and I hit the wrong button, I guess. But here I am back again.
Okay. We're just talking about the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and it was 1968. I was off by 2 years. They went to India, and I understand that both John and George really got into it, and Paul and Ringo not so much.
That's correct. George died with a Hindu guru at his bedside.
Oh, I didn't know that. Well,
now, John was different, actually. He was much more open, even though he confessed fascination with Hinduism. I believe there was a time when he became a Christian, actually.
John.
I met a man who was a theologian and went over to Japan to teach. And he met some Christian missionaries in Kyoto who told him that they lived next door to John and Yoko, and that their kid played with John Lennon's kid. So when Yoko was on a trip, John went to the local church and heard the gospel. And there was a time when some of his fans came and they knelt before him, and he said, "Don't kneel before me. Only Jesus Christ is worthy of worship." So there was a time, I know he did, I think he wrote to a famous evangelist and asked what was love. So he was a searcher, and he could well have become at some point a Christian. So I may see my friend John in heaven. I don't know.
Wow.
Well, there was an interview with him, or with somebody who lived with Lennon in the Dakota apartments in New York. He was kind of like a business secretary of some kind. I don't know what his relationship was, but he had a business relationship. And he said John Lennon had a lot of conversations with him, and a couple of them at least, Lennon was very embarrassed by his ultra-liberal past. So you figure this is like 78 or 79 when he's having this conversation with him. He never had time to talk to other people about it, apparently. I mean, it was just months away from death. It was shot in December of 1980. I'll never forget that. I know where I was when I heard the news, one of those kind of things. He was talking about how, all the stuff that he was espousing, socialism and all that he had been so wrong, but that was about it. That's all of the conversation that the man shared. You can imagine maybe there was something religious beyond just the political.
You're breaking up for me. Your sound is breaking up for me, Ron.
How about you, Don?
No, I'm fine so far.
I'll move my mic closer. Let's see what happens.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm talking
So,
directly into my mic now.
okay. So, in your book here, you point out we had talked before we got on air about the Parliament of the World's Religions. So we have the influence of the Beatles on culture. And then in 1993, we had the Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago. The first one had been in Chicago in 1893. I wasn't at that one, but I was at the one in 1993. And you write that the movement has not lost its quest for spirituality. This movement, which you discussed earlier about, you say, check your New Age advertiser where you will find chakra media, chakra mediums, yoga, witchcraft channeling, astral travel, visualization, kundalini sex, Native American animism, and all the gods and goddesses you can handle. You then go on to say the movement has not lost its quest for spirituality. It has diversified and gone mainline, just as the Hindu mystic Swami Vivekananda prophesied at the first Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago in 1893. His dream was the creation of a, quote, society of Western science and socialism and Indian spirituality, end quote. 1 century later, the 1993 Parliament in Chicago realized Vivekananda's dream and tasted of the global character and power of the syncretistic movement that had been just a tiny project in 1893. You and I were both at the Parliament in 1993. What was it that you saw there, and how did you think that that might impact culture and the church, if at all?
Well, both you and I remember seeing on that stage all the religions of the world locked in arms, trying to develop a sense of spiritual unity. I always remember the total failure when this group, along with how many, 9,000 people, I think it was, tried to sing a hymn. And it was a total failure because, hymns are worship of God, the creator, who is distinct from us. But the hymns that the pagans sing are really hymns about themselves. So you can't get too excited about that. But I remember the hymn singing was awful. The point is that joining of all those religions sort of gives flesh to that list of religions that you just read out. That was, I think, the time when we really saw the full expression of pagan religions of all kinds being accepted in the culture.
That's true. Now, we also saw a couple of other things. I know, and I don't know if you recall this or not, but a fist fight had broken out in one of the plenary sessions between the Muslims and the Hindus, and it resulted in having to bring the Chicago police to break up this battle going on at this big supposed peace and harmony event.
I didn't hear that. That's interesting.
Yeah, that was and in fact, when that happened, the Wiccans started a big circle dance trying to bring peace to the room and all sorts of. It was pretty interesting time. And then the Jewish contingent left because Louis Farrakhan was scheduled to speak. So they had a little bit of a rocky time at that event. But they have continued hosting these over the next. They have them about every 3 to 5 years. I've been to several of them. Each one getting more sophisticated. They're trying to become the religious ambassadors for the UN. That's one of the things that they're working on now. And in my opinion, whatever that's worth, I think groups like the Wiccans attended in search of credibility in mainstream religion. The Muslim contingent we spent time with, we asked them why they were there, and we asked them, knowing that the Wiccans were on stage and were one of the more popular groups, and knowing that Islam takes a similar view to witchcraft that Christians do, we asked them why they were there. And the wife of the leader of the Muslim group said that She was there because she's looking for peace, especially in her country where the Hindus were killing her family who are Muslims. And she was hoping the parliament might be able to bring something like that about. So there's a sense among humans that we want some peaceful coexistence, and yet we're not finding that. I would suggest because we're sinful beings, but that's just my opinion, I suppose. So
I think it's the Bible's opinion too.
Just your opinion and a couple of billion other Christians' opinions.
Because, as
Yeah.
Peter says, it's the Bible's opinion. All right, Peter, you in your book you write this because this kind of gets us to where I think we need to talk for the rest of our time together. Let me raise that up. Make it as seeable as possible. The real enemy of the church's faith is no longer anti-religious atheistic humanism, but a revived pagan religion. It is not that we have no God, but that we have too many. It is not a lack of spirituality, but rather a spiritual syncretism. Many decry the dissolution of society, but few see the religious threat of the new spirituality. Hidden under its free-flowing robes of tolerance lies the skeleton of monism. What does that mean? To the average person sitting in a pew today, the average pastor, can you build on that statement? What does that mean to us today? This was written over 20 years ago.
That's right. And I didn't know the implications of some of the things I wrote on that page. Now I see with more clarity what I was talking about, because I since wrote in further publications about what's called post-secularism. I never thought I would ever see post-secularism, because I was talking about secularism in that citation. And actually, secularism now is dying. You know, that atheistic refusal of spirituality, treating all those odd spiritualities we saw in Chicago at the Parliament of the World's Religions as simplistic superstition, right? That's
Right.
the way secularists saw religion. But now those same secularists have gotten religion. And so the world is much more open to spirituality, but it's the spirituality of monism, which fits, of course, with secularism, because secularism is a form of monism, or what I call one-ism. And let me tell you what I mean by that. The Apostle Paul is absolutely brilliant in the way he configures what lies before us as human beings. In Romans 1:25, he places before us only two options for being a human being. Did you notice that, Don? Only two options. You were talking about two at the beginning of the program, but this is the essence of Christianity. It is a theology of the binary, of two-ness. And paganism wants to get rid of two-ness and make everything one. But the reason that is true is what Paul says in Romans, where he says they exchange. Here are the two. They exchanged the truth of God for the lie, and here's what it is, and worshipped and served the creation rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. So you have two objects of worship, the creation or the Creator. And those are the only two options ever available. So that even secularists and atheists will worship some form of nature, some form of themselves. They won't worship God, the Creator.
You even see that, let's say,
It's the only other option.
Go ahead.
So,
well, I was going to say the options are one-ism and two-ism, and you can describe one-ism as secular humanistic, or spirituality coming from the East, where God is within, pantheism, panentheism, all these various forms of worship of nature rather than the worship of God the Creator. So we still face that issue. But the interesting thing is, as I was saying, we now live, or we're now beginning to move into a period of what is being called post-secularism. Did you ever hear of that, Don?
Yeah.
I have. Yeah.
Now,
Tell the truth.
For our listeners,
Tell the truth. Have you ever heard
post-secularism?
of post-secularism?
I think a lot of people have, haven't they?
You've heard of post-Christianity,
I've heard.
postmodernism.
Well,
I don't think you've ever heard of post-secularism.
Well, why not? It sounds familiar. Why not? Are you the first person to use it? Is this?
Well, people don't use the phrase, and it doesn't seem to be really on everyone's lips. But I believe it's the truth about where we are right now.
Yeah, there's post-secularism has a Wikipedia page. I can't say that I've been engaged in many discussions about it, or really, frankly, very interested, because there's a post for everything, it seems.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
And so, you have post-evangelicalism, you have, and I try to wait for people to define what they mean by these things, and if they don't, then I just move on. Now, but speaking of defining things, I think for the sake of our audience, I'm going to make sure we're on the same track here. Monism historically means that it answers the question, how many things are there? And monism in other words, ultimately, in the ultimate sense of reality, what does reality boil down to? And this would be metaphysical religious monism, would say everything really boils down to one thing. I am you, and you are me, and we are we, and we are all together.
It sounds like a Beatles song.
It sounds like something John Lennon might sing right there. And so monism would say there's only one thing, and like a pantheist would qualify as a monist. A panentheist, would you say, would qualify as a monist?
Definitely.
Too? Definitely.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there's dualism. So you were talking about in terms of one-ism and two-ism. We hear about dualism where there's basically two things. There's, there's the heavenly.
I think there's a problem that dualism is a distinction within monism. It's not an ultimate description of existence. It's dualism on a monistic background. That's what it is. And the dualism is that there is spirit and flesh, if you like, the two notions.
There are many kinds of dualism, and sometimes they're not. If it's not a philosophical or religious dualism, some people would prefer the word duality in order to avoid that conclusion. In order to avoid, the term has so much baggage, dualism, depending on who you're talking about or talking to. So, like in Indian philosophy, there's some schools of that says reality is fundamentally composed of two parts instead of one. You were talking about spirit-flesh dualism. There's mind-body dualism. The most common dualism in Western philosophy is what Francis Schaeffer called the upper story, lower story dualism.
But that's Christianity, you see.
Well,
that's very different.
That goes back to Plato, actually. That's a Platonic thing. And yeah, it's been absorbed into some Christianity. But yeah, so I'll let you go on from here. I'm just trying to say these are how terms are used, but you're talking about one-ism and two-ism. So let's go with your words.
Well, and ASEC poses a question: isn't two-ism insufficient because religions like Judaism and Islam hold to some forms of creator-creature distinction? Wouldn't it be better to adopt a tridilogical worldview like many church fathers did?
Well, I'd like to speak to that because
Okay.
Rabbinic Judaism and Islam reject the Trinity, right?
Yes.
That's a fundamental element in those two systems. And once you reject the Trinity, you reject the possibility of having a transcendent personal God. And so for God to be personal in those systems, he has to create us. Then that God becomes dependent on us for a fundamental attribute of his existence, namely personhood. And thus he becomes basically a onist God like all the others. You see what I'm saying? That,
Wow.
I'm not sure.
that in those two systems, God is dependent on the creation.
Okay.
Therefore, that makes the creation ultimate, and he
Right.
is just one element in all the other elements in the end. Whereas with the Trinity, we have a God who is totally transcendent and yet
Right.
personal because of the three persons of the Trinity.
Right. So you have.
I know
That's
that's
a good- that's a good
complicated,
response.
but
I'm tracking with.
I think that's complicated, but I do think that is a very important way of looking at Rabbinic Judaism and Islam that tries to say it's in favor of the creator-creature distinction, but ultimately cannot make it.
It has a difficult time, especially Islam, have establishing the personality, the personal nature of God.
That's right.
Judaism, of course, has the advantage of having at least the Old Testament. Well,
that's why I said Rabbinic Judaism,
okay.
because you do have a Judaism, Old Testament Judaism, that really does have the Trinity within it.
It does. I believe you're right. What we have in going on in the West now, particularly in liberal Christian theology since at least the 19th century, is this the idea that comes through from process theology that God and other forms of theology as well, that God and creation are co-relative in the sense that they depend on each other for. They'll actually make the statement in some of these schools of theology that God needs his creation in order to, how should I say this? In order to be personal, in some cases, it really depends on which school you're talking about. That there's some sense of the creation, the God needs his creation just as much as the creation needs him.
That's right.
And of course, the Bible says no. God is overall blessed forever. He doesn't need anything that he's created. Everything is outside of himself. He is everything exists purely by his grace. Now, I'm not talking about grace in the sense of the favor that sinners have, the kind of unmerited favor that sinners have after they sin. I prefer to call that demerited favor.
Yeah.
Because, but even Adam owed God complete, perfect, and perpetual obedience even before he was presented with the tree in the garden. Even before, just by virtue of him being a creature, he owed God his entire being, his entire existence, and his entire obedience. So, in a sense, he didn't merit. He couldn't merit anything except through the terms that God laid out for him. Here's what you need to do to get eternal life. Don't eat that. So in any case, that what we see going on in a lot of Christian theology now is a compromise of the view of God, a watering down of his transcendence over nature. complete transcendence.
Well, we do, and we're going to move on to that. And
That's why
we're going to
you
move.
come in conflict with that kind of theology. You come in conflict with what Paul is teaching in Romans 1:25.
Right.
God can only be worshipped as the creator if he
Right.
is transcendent.
Absolutely.
Right. Now,
So
these
are modified forms of one-ism that appear to be Christian, but they're fundamentally not.
No, they're not. They're
no,
absolutely
they're not. And this has infected the church in some interesting ways, because more and more churches are trying to get away from doctrine. It's just, difficult to get new people to come in if you start dealing with
Right.
doctrine all the time. And one of our sponsors deals with this, actually.
Yeah, we hear about them through World's End Theology Outlet, and they have some questions, including, are you still trying to figure out how to clean up in the ministry business? Do you want to finally learn how to get to the bottom of growing a successful church? Would you like to flush away your failures and start having your best church now? Well, then you need Charlatan Ultra Soft, because nothing says theologically soft like Joel Osteen and Charlatan Ultra Soft. And even in this day of pandemics, there is never any shortage. It's been personally tested by the man himself. It provides comfort where it counts. It wipes away even the most stubborn orthodoxy and comes with a money-back guarantee. Keep those butts in the pews with Charlatan Ultra Soft, only at World's End Theology Outlet. So, back to our.
That was funny.
Thank you. Glad you. I'm glad you think so.
Well, it is, and my heart is
Funny.
What has happened to the church as you're talking about monism, for example. Richard Rohr, who's had a huge influence on the church, especially since 2016, he sort of has become the go-to theologian for many evangelical churches, unfortunately. And one of his big things is to get away from what's the word? Not Ron, you were talking about that, not dualism, from being dualistic.
Who's this again? Richard Rohr?
Richard Rohr, the promoter of the Enneagram.
Yeah, he talks about the spirituality of singularity.
Right. That's right.
He doesn't want us to understand ourselves as separate from God.
Correct. And the whole purpose of the Enneagram is to find out which path you need to take to get back to the realization that you never sinned, that you are with God. Christ is the cosmos, is the first incarnation, and by virtue of being part of the cosmos, you are already in God. So monism really is what he's pressing for the church to embrace. And if you have churches like Joel Osteen's church, how would a Christian ever realize that what he's teaching is heretical?
It's very interesting that a book written by a Jewish convert to Hinduism spoke about the fact that the essence of Hinduism is the term Advaita. And the term Advaita in Sanskrit means not two. So it's a fundamental rejection of the Christian faith of Romans 1:25, which Paul says there are two fundamental ways, or two fundamental realities, the creator and the creature. Hinduism says Advaita is the essence of things, and that means not two. So you can see how Richard Rohr is drawing close to that kind of Hindu thinking when he wants to speak, to reject the distinctions between us and God.
Right. Now, this seems to be a pretty big theme for you, this idea of monism. You write in here, baby boomers, my wife, by the way, calls them crybaby boomers, and that's us. We're crybaby boomers. We're a generation of seekers. Only 4% of them are atheists or agnostics. The rest follow some religion. Our declining moral standards are not because we no longer religious, but because we have changed religions. The noble search for expanded consciousness and alternate spiritualities in the 60s led east, where seekers discovered mysticism and returned to spawn a relativistic religious hybrid, Western spiritual monism. How is this entering the church? I mean, besides Richard Rohr, did the Emergent Church have some idea or some sway in that happening? How is it that it is so moving into the church that pastors seem to be unaware of it?
Well, you and I went to the Parliament of the World's Religions. I was struck by the fact that in all the discussion groups I went to, the great problem was Christianity, biblical Christianity. And biblical Christianity was not to that 1993 Parliament of the World's Religions. Did you notice there was one absent on that platform? It was biblical Christianity.
Right.
This is proof to me that there are two distinctions, and only two options, that is, worship of creation or worship of the Creator. And worship of the Creator could not exist on that platform. Now, a few years later, guess who's you know this, one of the lead speakers at the Parliament of the World's Religions was Brian McLaren.
Right.
Could you have ever imagined that 1993 that a so-called Christian could speak at that group? And yet, I'm not sure of the date.
Well, no, Brian McLaren isn't a Christian.
Well, he's not now. And that's because...
No, I don't think he ever was.
Here's what he says. Christianity must lose its... to embrace an inclusive God who demonstrates solidarity with all. We need a bigger, non-dualistic God. Here's the Tunis thing. A non-binary God who is in the story, not outside of time, not a prime mover or divine watchmaker. So McLaren's God is a one-ist pagan God. And the non-binary vision he proposes is total paganism.
In other words, he's saying Christianity must stop
that's
being
where
Christianity.
The church...
Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to...
Now, just to interrupt,
how has this gone into the church?
He got that from Richard Rohr.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So anyways, can you hear us, Peter? Because I thought you were breaking up a little bit. Are we breaking up for you?
Station there, and I didn't hear you, but I can hear you now.
Okay. You're
a little broken up.
Yeah, I think we have a little connection issue. How about you, Don? What are you hearing?
You and I are fine.
Yeah, I'm not hearing anything now.
I think he's got some internet problems going on there. They had to come out yesterday to fix it. So Brian McLaren was the plenary speaker. Another, the closing plenary speaker at this most recent Parliament was Jim Wallace. Another one in Emergent.
There's the other one.
Yeah. So
that's interesting. You see, you have those two men who wanted to be leaders of the evangelical movement, now leaders of the Parliament of the World's Religion. That's where some parts of Christianity have gone.
Yeah, Jim Wallace. I think both McLaren and Wallace really do understand evangelicalism. I believe they were both raised in it, and that's why I believe they're not Christians. Because if you understand it that well and you depart that far from it, you are a wolf in sheep's clothing. So I'm not, I don't believe that. Now I know more about Brian McLaren's theology than I know about Jim Wallace's. But every time I read something Jim Wallace writes, every time I think this is so far away from Scripture, it is not funny. But McLaren has come out and denied virtually every central tenet of the Christian faith.
Right.
So there's no doubting that here's a man who, going all the way back in his history, even for him, the center of the faith for him, as even as a young man. I've seen this. He recorded some music back in the 70s or whatever, and it became available online. And even even the lyrics of the music, it was nothing about the gospel, nothing. It was all about how he wanted to be unified with all these people. And Jesus was a handy way of facilitating this unity that he was seeking. Not that he really wanted the kind of unity that only Jesus can bring to only those who are in Christ with him. So yeah, it's really amazing that a man like Brian McLaren could have once been on the board of Christianity Today. That's just dumbfounding. It's just mind-boggling. It just shows you how low Christianity Today has sunk. It is no longer an evangelical publication. It is barely even a Christian one anymore. That's my opinion.
Well, that Edith Gali has just become a Roman Catholic.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's just starting to fall apart. It's crumbling.
Now, you talk about here the new Bible, the ancient Gnostic Bible, and a new method of Bible study. What does that look like to those who are tuning in and wondering, okay, what are you talking about? Because this really impacts the church. This is where we're at right now. What is the Gnostic Bible and the new method of Bible study?
Well, it's interesting. The Gnostics never had a Bible.
Right.
They had their own Bible in their minds.
Yeah.
Gnostics are those people that believe that the truth about God is that they are one with God, that God is within them. And so their Gnostic sense is an individual sense of their own spirituality. That's what gnosis means. It means a knowledge of the self as divine. And interestingly, in one of the Gnostic texts that was discovered in the 8, it is said that, well, it's talking about the God of the Old Testament. And it's interesting, I've studied all these Gnostic texts. They all reject the God of the Old Testament. So this is an interesting thing we see now in modern day evangelicalism, with the rejection of the Old Testament by some of the evangelical leaders. Stanley, for instance, tells people they don't need the Old Testament.
Right.
Andy Stanley. Well, in this Gnostic text, it says that the goddess Sophia casts Yahweh, the creator, into hell. That's about as radical as you can be in rejecting Christian orthodoxy, that there is no such thing as a creator. We create that notion, and then the notion of the Bible loses any meaningful sense, and the scriptures are the things you write from your own soul.
Right. Now, there are those who really don't like what the Bible has to say because it interferes with the spirituality that they want to have. But one of our sponsors, here's another sponsor, one of our sponsors has stepped up to solve that problem. Ron, we're not hearing you.
Sorry about that. Let's back up. Okay, here we go. We all know that awkward feeling when someone in a Bible study says, I wish the Bible didn't have all these verses about hell. Or when you're having couples devotions and your spouse says, I'm just not comfortable with verses that teach the traditional view of marriage. Or when you're sitting in a church and you're thinking, Why do all the Bibles I read always have to agree with what my conservative pastors are teaching? That's why we're introducing My Bible. It's guaranteed the most comfortable Bible you'll ever own. We've spent literally minutes creating a way you can have the Bible that's perfect for you. You used to have to go down some dark back alley to get a Bible like this, but not anymore. Just write down all the places where you want to make your Bible more comfortable for you, and then email them to us or enter them into our handy online form. And the results speak for themselves. Yolanda from Portland says, now that I have my Bible, I never worry that my white male pastor's sermons might actually be right. Ben from seminary says, my Bible gave me the confidence I needed to drop out of my Hebrew and Greek classes. Renee from Madison said, every single one of my anti-capitalist, anti-police, and anti-social protest chants now comes from my Bible. And Buck50 from Brooklyn said, since I got my Bible, I have no trouble basing my violent and misogynistic lyrics on scripture. So when someone throws an uncomfortable verse at you, you can say, that's not in my Bible at mybible.cult. So
there you go.
My Bible, fluff it up, get it nice and comfortable.
Why tell them to drop out of Hebrew and Greek class? I was a Greek.
Say it again. You are Greek.
I was a Greek teacher. I have no students.
Oh, these days you wouldn't.
Right. So, okay, so that's how we get the Gnostic Bible. It's intuitive. How I feel about God is what matters, not what's in the written word. The Bible's okay, but you can't really take it all that seriously because there's more important ways to be spiritual. How about, and that would then account for the spiritual experience you talk about, right?
Don, I'm not hearing you. You're breaking up.
Okay. I'm not sure why I'm breaking up. We're talking about how that since the Bible is less important, experience determines everything about your relationship with God. How is that measured?
That's right.
Measured.
How is that measured?
Yeah.
Well, I guess you go ahead, Ron.
I was thinking, are those headphones handy? Because I wonder if that would be the solution if you're really experiencing a feedback issue. But if not, we can just keep going because we only have just a few more minutes.
Yeah. So not what is not let's do this. What is Gnostic spirituality?
What is Gnostic spirituality?
Well, it's the sense that you have a gnosis of yourself as divine, and whatever you say is true. So it's obviously a very revolutionary kind of thinking about spirituality.
As I understand,
I think we're having a new form of gnosis in our time. And I'm just going to say this at the end of your program. I've just started reading a book. This is the book.
Oh, yes. Yeah, now your screen is frozen on us.
Cynical Critical Theory.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big thing. My pastor actually got a copy of that the other day and just started reading it. It's a very important book.
Okay. Now he's frozen in time. I don't know if he's still with us or not.
Yeah, Peter, if you can hear us, your image and your sound is frozen. But he's showing us Cynical Theories, which is a book by James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose. And they've been working for quite a while in trying to basically confront and debunk a critical theory. which that's been their main thrust, but critical race theory comes into that. Critical race theory has especially found an opening in the church right now.
Right. And where is that showing up mostly?
Well, we're seeing a lot of it in the Southern Baptist Convention. To a somewhat lesser extent, we're seeing it in other groups. My denomination, the Presbyterian Church in America, which is a conservative Presbyterian church.
I've just come back.
Great.
So whatever
And
you
you
said
found-
prior to that, I don't know what you told.
We were just describing. I was just giving an overview of the book Cynical Theory that you were Cynical Theories that you were holding up. You can.
Good.
Why don't you give us? Well, have you read it yet? Have you had a chance? It's a new book.
I've had it a day. I've read 2 chapters in it, but
Yeah.
I think it's going to be very important because it's written by 2 atheists.
Right.
Right.
They're giving the reason why we are in a post-secular time.
And I just got to. I mean, go ahead.
I think it's a very important book, but they are showing why we're in a post-secular time because they're talking about what's called critical race theory,
Right,
and postmodernism. And postmodernism made an attack on secularism.
Yeah.
And it silenced the secularists by coming up with a theory of language that is now being used to into the church with notions of racism and a kind of, I would say, Gnostic spirituality that will undo us for years to come. So I'm concerned about this new kind of Gnostic spirituality that comes in the church via critical race theory, which justifies various positions without you having to defend yourself. Because the notion is that every discourse is created for power, and the one you're using to come back to, a discussion and intelligence and reason and rationality is merely a power play for other forms of discourse that don't buy into that. So that the Western civilization on which we have built everything, and which is the result, I believe, of Christianity, is now being rejected for the sake of various forms of theory, of other ways of looking at existence. And you don't have to justify that rationally. And
Right.
so you've got these various theories coming into the church to justify things like systemic racism and so on. You don't have to justify systemic racism rationally because you can't.
Right. So imagine, I like to put it this way. Imagine a game in which you have multiple players. You might even have multiple teams, whatever. And over the course, literally the course of centuries, I mean, literally centuries that this game has been played, you've devised rules for how to play it. Okay.
That's right.
You've devised rules of logic for argumentation. You've devised rules of political intercourse for how to establish different acceptable kinds of social structures and social contracts and governments. You've been working on these rules for centuries, and then a group comes in and says, all your rules, which you say are to create fairness, are really to create power structures.
That's right. That's right.
And the problem with your rules is really ultimately is that some people lose at the game.
That's right.
And if you really had the right rules, nobody would ever lose the game. So in other words, they're saying we need to rewrite all the rules so that everybody is absolutely equal. Nobody ever loses. Everybody gets the same outcome.
Right. And you don't need evidence or reason to argue your point. You just
Well,
assert it.
Well,
And
because as soon as
that's what I was saying. I believe that
Right.
is fundamentally Gnostic.
Right. Well, because and they're saying this because, hey, the rules do not give my desired goal. They
That's right.
give therefore the rules are bad. Therefore the rules are wrong because they don't give. So we have this small minority that what makes them gain in popularity is this idea, which ironically was developed within the context of the rules. In the context of the rules, the idea was equality is a pretty good thing. It's nice to be equal. But the rules never promised that everybody would be absolutely equal, that everybody would have the same amount of money, that everybody would have the same amount of everything. They never promised that. And so then the cynical theorists, the critical theorists come back and say, well, that's what's wrong with the rules. Therefore, they flip the rules to say, the rules were all about power to begin with. They were never really about fairness.
You know, it's interesting. Ron and I have been part of a private group on critical race theory. Mostly, I observe they just irritate me mostly. But someone had asked the question, have you read Thomas Sowell's latest book, The Quest for Cosmic Justice? And a few of the kind of pro-critical race theory defenders, their response was, oh, he's an economist. Like, okay, does he not have anything to say about this? Well, no. And so I read the book and I realized why they dissed the book. He deals with facts, evidence, and reason to show here's what happens in this culture under these conditions with this economic thing going on. And he actually gives facts and evidence and reason and compares that to other cultures and their relative outcomes. That does not fit with the whole critical race theory rules, as you put it, Ron.
Yeah.
Well, I just introduced that. I'm glad I did, because I'm beginning to wonder if this critical race theory and the use of postmodernism is a new expression of Gnosticism in the churches.
Well, yeah, I mean, they have their own special knowledge, and the special knowledge apparently it's a very, like, Gnosticism, ancient Gnosticism was a very undemocratic thing. It was the Gnostics were those who had received the special knowledge thanks to being special themselves. They were considered special. Every once in a while, you have some of the. It doesn't occur very often in Gnostic literature, but the concept of being elect or chosen comes up. But there are so many different variations of Gnosticism that it's not always there. But in some branches, the idea is that you're specially chosen or selected to have this knowledge. In other branches, anybody can have it, but you have to strive for it. You have to get it. So you have, the basic idea is that once you get this knowledge, you are inherently superior to those around you. You should be their masters, and they should serve you and ask you the questions. And we see this attitude among the critical theorists and the critical race theorists. We see this attitude of, well, you white people, you should just listen. We're the ones with the knowledge. You don't have it. Right. And that's really essentially a denial of common humanity.
Yes.
And ironically, I think what's going to sabotage it is the doctrine of intersectionality. Because the doctrine of intersectionality says, hey, one group does not have the monopoly on being the victim. But it does, at the same time, it says there is one group that doesn't have any clue what it means to be a victim, and that's cisgendered white males. So what they have done is they've selected cisgendered white males and basically said to us, you're not human, or at least not the way we are.
Right.
Well, it's the difference of the oppressed and the oppressors. That's the difference, isn't it?
Right. Well, they're basically trying to oppress cisgendered white males. They don't call it.
But they say that.
Yeah.
They say
it's
that the
basically
cisgender white males are the oppressors, and everyone else is oppressed.
James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose, who wrote the book you're referring to, plus Peter Boghossian, who's been a
Yeah.
colleague and a collaborator in the past, they like to refer to these as grievance studies. I'm coming to the conclusion that they are vengeance studies. Okay, in other words,
True.
they're out to get vengeance on cisgendered white males.
But
They have.
What do you see of this in the churches? I think this is coming into even evangelical churches.
Well, they know that churches, Christian churches at least, have a history of some form of a doctrine of repentance or penance. They tap into that. First, they persuade the Christians, particularly white Christians, particularly white male Christians. They tap into the common history we have with, if we've sinned, if my brother has aught against me, I am to go and reconcile with my brother. Matthew 5:23. I mean, and so they know they've studied us. Your enemy will study you to find out what the best way to attack you is. And don't make no mistake about it. Critical theory and critical race theory are our enemies. And so they've studied us, and they didn't have to study us too hard because many of them came from out of a Christian background. So they know that if all they have to do is persuade us that we have offended them in some way, and we will try to make amends. The problem is they haven't persuaded everyone, but they've persuaded a lot of people. They persuaded more and more of the church every day. In the United States, I think we have this particular phenomenon. I think our politics and religion overlap to such an extent that people with a more conservative outlook tend to be more resistant to charges of. We tend to believe in something called due process, and please bring forth evidence that I have sinned. Me personally, we tend. Whereas there's the other side, which is the more conservative side tends to be more individualist. The more liberal side tends to be more communitarian, more group oriented. So therefore, they're more open to arguments about group guilt, corporate guilt, and so therefore, I'm just by virtue of me being part of this group, I must be guilty. So that's where we've seen in the left wing of the church, which is already mostly left wing politically as well. We've seen this critical theory, critical race theory make tremendous inroads.
Right.
And
it is dividing. To Peter's question, how is it coming into church? You're just explaining some of the ways. The Southern Baptist Church, which was not noted for being left, is splitting over this issue right now.
Well, because they were raised, the latest generation, it's also a generational thing, because the most recent generation coming up in all conservative denominations was raised by leftists because their parents ceded over their education to the state. And the state has been, the bureaucracy, the deep state bureaucracy has been leftist since at least the late 70s in this country.
That was a leftist with John Dewey in the 30s.
Well, but I can remember conservative teachers that I had when I was younger. I don't think there are anymore I think there's a few in the teaching profession. I mean, I've known a few.
It's 12-1 in terms of conservative to liberal in universities.
In the universities, right? And I think in the lower grades, that would be interesting. I hesitate to speculate whether it's better or worse in the K through 12 branches of education.
This book, Howard Zinn, this is a book about Howard Zinn, A Popular History of America, is a purely Marxist interpretation of American history. And this is the only book being used in American schools.
Wow.
For years.
Huh.
Wow. So
we have a major problem ahead of us, which is going deeper really than the spirituality that I was seeing 20 years ago. this is coming now into the churches as a political theory
Right.
Right.
Oh,
that will
yeah.
split our churches in two.
And I think. Go ahead.
In your opening, something called the face off, or what we might call a preface of your book, Pagans in the Pews, you say this. We're going to start wrapping up here with this. At the beginning of the third millennium, two radically opposed ways of understanding human nature and the universe vie for our allegiance. One defends the truth, the other the diabolical lie. One follows the God of the Bible, the other follows the goddess of paganism. That's what we're seeing here, and it is, as we're talking about, it's in the church. So,
Yeah,
what do the pastors need to understand, and how do they fight against this?
Well, I would say that we can describe this critical race theory as pagan in as much as the theorists deny any absolute truth. There is no truth. It's all human created, and that Christians cannot buy. And if they do, they've bought into a modern form of Gnostic paganism.
Okay, so pastors need to go back to teaching scripture verse by verse, precept upon precept through the Bible, give us historical context, challenge then believers to live the faith that they, because from my understanding, Ron, you'll like this one. The Bible is the final authority for what?
Faith and practice.
Faith and practice. Is there some other authority that we need to look to for faith and practice?
Yeah, me. I'm just kidding. No, that's it. There is nothing for what we believe and what we do. There's nothing else.
Right. Peter, would you concur with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we have three witnesses. How do you like that?
Two or three are agreed on any one thing.
So, pastors, my heart goes out to pastors. They have a difficult job because they're trying to keep the people happy. They're also under this illusion that it's their job to bring more bodies into the church, and that's not true. We don't really find that to be biblical either. But the Bible should be our final authority for faith and practice. We should teach it regularly. We should disciple our leadership, who then should be discipling the congregation. They should be won from paganism, not led into paganism. And my fear is, and you and I discussed this yesterday, I think, that we have gone from having pagans in the pews to having pagans in the pulpits.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
If many pastors are adopting this new theory, we're in deep trouble.
From one generation to the next, if there's one constant in the church, is that, as Paul said in Acts chapter 20, savage wolves will rise up from in your very midst, seeking to devour the flock of the Lord. And it comes in a different form in every generation. They look nice. They look pleasant. They come as ministers of righteousness. They come looking like one of the sheep. And every time people are fooled and people are lost because of them.
Right. Well, and Christian schools. In fact, Peter, you might this might be interesting to you. One of our viewers, Regeneres, says our local Christian high school has gone left. And last week, Wheaton Christian Academy, one of the professors there, wrote a blog about critical race theory and what a problem it is amongst her students with the oppressors and the oppressed, the whites oppressors versus everybody else, which raised sort of a community flap there. She ended up, after some consternation being exhibited by the leaders of the school, issued a public apology. But I think she did that under duress, not because she actually believed in it. She wrote what she wrote because she believed critical race theory, and this is being taught in Christian schools now.
So she's a proponent of CRT.
Yes, proponent of it, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Ron, we have gone over more than normal, but it's been good. I'm glad you have been with us, Dr. Jones, and I'd like to have you back at some future point. But in the meantime, Ron is going to walk us out of here.
Yes, our resident cult leader profiler is Kneel Before Me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Culinary services are provided by Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D Opposer. Our Mormon Archives manager is Polly Gummas. Our Liberal Denominations bureau chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, OD Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Joe Leg Pulling. Our technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Our grievance resolution director is Yvonne Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is wiretapping, and our original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, although you will never be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never, never. All right, Peter, if you could hold on for a minute. Oh, Christopher Green asked, can he get a tinfoil hat?
Yeah,
if you can hold on for a second, we're going to say goodbye to everybody else. And I just want to do a parting word with you before we end. Say goodbye.
That's all, folks.